I had no idea. I was waiting for the bell. So we usually get a 5-minute warning bell to let us know. So for the kids to go shower, so we're not they don't shower to change. So I'm off kilter here, so I apologize. But we're going to take the whole time. This one's a long one, and we need all the time we got. So let me introduce who I am. My name is Benedict, and I have been teaching with comprehensible input since 2001. Actually, it was like my second semester of teaching because I really sucked as a regular teacher. I couldn't do it from the textbook. I couldn't keep myself awake, so there's no way that I was going to keep the kids awake. And I taught high school for 12 years. And I didn't know I'd make the change, but I'm currently teaching at Hormone High, and I've been doing that for 6 years. And I teach in California at Ike Middle School. It's in Roseville, California, which is 20 minutes north of Sacramento. And what makes us unique, I have to say this, otherwise my principal will never let me keep going to these things, is that we are the only IB World School public middle school in Placer County, which is the county that we're in. What makes that unique, because it's not uncommon to have IB at the high school. We are an entire school, so every student is an IB student. A lot of high schools are IB within the school. You choose that path or not, like the AP path or not. All of our kids mandatory take IB at our entire school. And what's beautiful about IB, it gives us job security, because at the high school, most that foreign language is an elective. And kids, even though the state might say you need 2 years, as soon as that second year, half your kids drop out. In the IB, they are required to take foreign language every single year they are in IB. And they tell you how long. It's got to be 50 hours per year. Well, we're on a trimester system, so there are not 50 hours in a trimester. So kids can't do the wheel, which is what they normally get like in 6th grade, where they try out Spanish and then French and then maybe some other language and then choose one for 7th and 8th grade. They don't get that because they don't have the 50 hours. So in our level 1, in 6th grade, they take level 1, whether it be French or Spanish. In level 7th grade, they take level 2, French or Spanish. And then in level 8th grade, they take a level 3. So we teach a level 3 at the middle school. If they pass it, our rules are 80% or better to move from level to level. Then they will go into high school in level 4. And that impacted our high school because they don't have a lot of incoming kids in levels 1 and 2 anymore. So they've had to beef it up. And they have IB, but it's only 11th and 12th grade. So they had to add classes for them to go in between, because level 4 was originally the IB class, and they can't be legally in an IB because they have the diploma program, which is 11th and 12th grade only. So they had to add classes in there, so it impacted in a good way for them as well. So that's where I teach. It's my experience. We are it's different in the Midwest. In California, we have joint districts where teach high school and K through 8. I'm not in one of those. So my district is K through 8, and we are a 100% comprehensible input district. You cannot get employed for world language unless you are willing to do that 100%. If the kids tattle on you and you're doing grammar-based stuff, vocab-based stuff, we will not keep you. We will let you go. We tell you that in the interview.
For how long has that been?
We started our program when we became IB 6 years ago, and so we've done it that way. I worked at a different school in Vegas. I worked before that for 7 years, and both schools we were the same way. That's what we wanted. We told them up front that's what we were going to do. If that's not you, this is not the place for you. Let them know right up front. Our high school is a different district, and the high school we feed into is comprehensible input based, but not the other high schools in the district. So we have 4 high schools in the district. But the one we feed into does. We work together. No, we don't have to, because we're technically 2 different districts. It's like going from one city to a different city, and you don't have to talk, but we do. Yes, you can see it's changing all my fonts. You can't even see this. So help us stay green. Download the presentation, and it's at Teach for June, all one word, like the month. teachforjune.com/CIIA. Comprehensible Input Iowa. Changing all my fonts. I hope it's not doing it with everything. So teachforjune.com/CIIA. And the handouts are there. So this is stuff we're going to talk about. This is just a foundation, because this is really, I can talk about this for 3 days. It takes a lot of stuff in here. We're going to have to go really fast in some things and slow down in some of the other things that I know that you'll want more information on. But that's all we're going to cover, so it's a heck of a lot. And just to tell you, this has been my baby. Standards-based grading has been my baby since 2002. Because in 2001, I was hired on an emergency permit. Basically, in California, they were so desperate for teachers that if you could breathe and you had a bachelor's degree, you could teach. I had no teaching courses, and they hired me for 2 classes, Spanish 2, 5th and 6th period. So I got paid nothing and no benefits because I was only 2 periods a day. And I had this girl, and I still have her picture on the back. She said, "Thank you for passing me." Because we all knew that she was in level 2, and her life depended, she could not string 2 words together to make a sentence. And in Spanish, you only need 1 word to make a sentence, the verb. She couldn't do it. But, you know, when you're a beginning teacher, you steal from all the other teachers. So I stole her rules, like no hats in class. I'm like, I don't care, so why would you have that rule? And the grading system, I copied it right from somebody else. And she could pass because she always did her homework, and she did artful projects. And back then, we graded based on how artsy it was, not on the actual content of what it was. So she got a C, and I said, that will never happen again. Because anybody else who gets her after me says she got a C in Spanish too, that she must know at least a C's worth of Spanish, and she knew 0 of Spanish. She failed every test and quiz I gave her. But because 25% was homework and another 25% was projects, 50% of her grade came from that. So that's where I came on this journey, and I've been on this journey ever since. So the current grading is a mess. Grades are all over the place. There's little to no consistency between teachers. Go from one classroom to the next, and there's no consistency. Schools, if you're no consistency down the hall, there's certainly not going to be consistency from one school to the other, even in the same district. Districts, from one district to another, or from state to state. And although 99.9% of all of our colleges across the country work off the GPA system to accept kids in, that GPA does not represent the same thing for every kid, for every school around the nation. Because there are some classes where they grade really easy and they grade on curves, and other classes not so much. And the grades actually rarely match students' ability, which is what happened with my friend. Brittany was her name. Little redhead, I remember. I still have her pictures. You know, when they give you your senior pictures, I still have it. Kids always ask, "Who is that?" Well, that's Brittany from way back when. First year of teaching. That C did not match her ability whatsoever. And so I went on a mission starting in 2002 to figure it out. Kids with high ability often have low grades. Lots of times because you're grading on homework, and they don't do it. Because it really is busy work for them, because they can succeed without it. And so because they're not doing it, they're getting 0s, and those 0s are crashing their grade. And kids with low ability often have passing grades because they do the homework. They're rule followers. They will follow the rules. And if we continue to grade the same way, we will continue to get the same results. And someone once said that was insane. You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
Albert Einstein. And it's funny, because we do this in a lot of stuff. As foreign language teachers, we are always optimistic in the fall. By winter break, we're starting a little pessimistic. By spring break, we're like, I have gone over these direct object pronouns I don't know how many times, and these dang kids, they don't know them by now. And at the end of the year, we've completely lost it. We're like, they did not learn anything this whole year. What was I even here for? And then we start the fall doing the exact same thing we did the year before that obviously didn't work. And we end careers this way, 20 years, 30 years of doing the same thing. So we need to change. If we want to truly make grades meaningful so that their grade actually matches their ability, we must change the way that we grade. It's just that simple. So why power grading? That's what I call it. When I started teaching 17 years ago, I used a traditional grading system. Tests, quizzes, projects, homework, participation. Ooh, that's so bad. But that's what I had. Does that look familiar? It's like what most of us have done at least one time in our career. And I was frustrated when students would get C's or better, yet unable to speak or write any language. It's really funny when you walk into the classroom and you ask your kids in French or German or Spanish 1 the very first day what your job as a teacher is, they'll say, to teach me to learn to speak and write the language fluently by the end of the year. Now, we know the fluently by the end of the year is not going to happen, but they're not wrong in the first part of that. No one comes in and says, you're going to teach me hundreds of thousands of vocabulary words and lots of grammar. They say you're going to teach me how to read, speak, write the language. And that's what we need to be doing. That's what we need to focus on. That's what we want them to do because, I don't know about you, I'm back to school night, which I don't know if it was last year or we did it again this year. It's on the first day of school. It's like, really, we're just getting our teachers' legs back and you want to stay for 10, 12 hours? But I asked the parents, how many of you took 4 years of a language? How many can still speak that language today? So all the hands go up in the beginning and all the hands go down. So what was the point? Because you ask the same question, how many of you took math all your school career, and how many can't do math? You know? I mean, they might not be able to do calculus anymore or stuff like that because that's not really practical math for most of us, but they can still do all the basics. I don't even think those parents could do the basics in the language they spent 4 years in. So I started experimenting with students' grades my second year. And when I say experiment, I should have been fired. The way I did it, I didn't get a single complaint by a parent or a kid, because we were in quarters, and I changed my grading system 100% every quarter. Trying all the things. And my kids know I'm deathly allergic to math. And I have to keep an EpiPen in my classroom because it used to be the old math room and I still get the hives. I am definitely allergic to math. But I had to learn all the math. And how I got them not to complain, and parents not to complain, because I presented both options but gave more benefits to the one I wanted to try. And I had them vote. And they always voted for what I wanted. You know, that's how it works. So, but I kid you not, every quarter for my second year of teaching, first year I went full-time, we went and switched every quarter until I figured out what worked. So I changed methods every single quarter. One time it was by the mode. One time it was by the median. One time I changed it. I mean, it was so different. I did ones with no numbers, just letters, no numbers. You know, you can get 4 A's for something because that was worth more than something that only had 2 A's on it. I mean, I tried everything. It was so off the wall, and kids didn't bat an eye. I mean, I'm telling you, if my administration knew that I did that, they probably would have had a heart attack. But they didn't get a single parent complaint, a single student complaint. And that was right when schools were transitioning to the online grade books, the computerized version. We didn't have a scanner where we could use any one. We just had a report in the final one. My first year we bubbled still. But then the second year we had to import them in. But I even used a spreadsheet because the grading programs couldn't calculate what I wanted them to calculate. So I had to use a spreadsheet. And I posted my grades off a spreadsheet. So I continued to make changes for the next 7 years. Now, I didn't make as drastic of changes. What I changed was what I valued and how much I valued it. I'm telling you, math was not my subject. And I used to bother the algebra teachers. They would run the other way when they saw me. Because I'm like, okay, I don't get this. I put another 100% in for the kid and the grade went down. How is that possible? My simple little non-math brain could not get around this. So I spent hours with algebra teachers trying to figure this out because my grades have turned out to be a 5-variable algebraic formula. The computer will do it. You don't have to worry. But that's what they were. The kids go, can you tell me how? In Nevada, we have something called the Millennial Scholarship. And if you had a certain GPA graduating, you could get 4 years free at one of our two big universities, University of Reno or University of in Las Vegas. And so the kids will go, okay, what do I need to get on this to be able to get my grade here so I can get my grade point average up to there? I'm like, it is a 5-variable algebraic grade just for my class. But then you've got 6 classes, which makes it a 6-variable algebraic equation once you figure out what my class grade is to figure out what you need to do to keep your grade. I'm like, no, no. I did it once for one kid. It was the second time I had to use algebra outside of college. Not a useful skill. And finally, I was able to get my grading practices to a place where a student's grade actually matches what they can do in the language. So now I can look at a kid and go, oh, they're a B student, go look at the grade point. Guess what? Their grade's the B. Almost every single time. There might be one odd, one out, but for the most part, they are right in line. And I call it power grading because it gives power to me as a teacher, because I don't think of myself as a teacher, I think of myself more as a coach to find out where their weaknesses are and help them boost up those weaknesses and celebrate where they excel. And it gives the power to the kids because instead of the kids coming to me and saying, Profe, I got a C. I can't go home with a C and grades are due next week, so what do I need to do? They come to me now and say, Profe, I have a weak speaking grade. What do I need to do to improve my speaking grade to get my grade up? So it's a much more productive conversation. Because the other one is like, we need to do better on tests and quizzes. Well, every idiot knows that. But that doesn't help them. What specifically do they need to work on those tests and quizzes to do better? So, what is it? Power grading is a proficiency-based grading and assessment system. And I say proficiency-based, not standards-based, though it's founded in standards-based things, because the actual standards aren't great. Because they lump things together that I need separated out. They lump listening and reading together. Well, what if I need to know which one they excel at and which one they don't at, and I can't based off the standard the way it's written. And same thing with speaking and writing. We are moving next year to a completely IB rubric, so we throw away the actual standards. We currently grade in the actual standards. Next year we're going on the IB rubric. And the IB standards, they only have 4, but they do the same thing. They have a listening one and a reading one, but then they have a speaking/writing one, and then a grammar accuracy one. We're only having that for 1 more year, which I said, we're switching. Can we just not switch to the one we know they're coming out in 2021 year? Because why do it for one change and the kids have to adapt twice to 2 different grading systems? Because they realize, too, that's a horrible system. So they have, for the 2021 school year, listening, reading, speaking, writing. They have it back that way and took out that accuracy because the rubric for the accuracy is pretty strict. And our kids are going to bomb on that. Because it's really, they have to write like 300 words in level 1, and it's got to be quite accurate to get a good grade. So we've just made universally, we're not going to tell anybody, we're not grading on that standard for the whole year. We just decided that as a team, that we weren't going to grade on that one. And we're getting observed by IB the next year, so hopefully they're not going to notice. So it's proficiency-based because I get more information from what they are proficient at than the actual standards themselves, because of the way that they're written. That aligns assessment with student ability. Power grading is based on standards-based grading practices. You have to get behind the standards-based grading practices. If you can't get behind that, this isn't going to work for you. If you try to manipulate things to fit something else, it's not going to work. Luckily, our school, up until last year, in name only, was a proficiency-based grading school district. I've been on a grading committee for the past 2 years because I like that stuff, and I want to have a say in what we do. So except for us, because IB, we have to grade on numbers, the rest of the district has gone away from numbers. There are no numbers, no letters. They've gone out. So last year, we first did the implication of summative is 100% of the grade. Formative could not be considered in the grade, which is standards-based grading. Before we had a 90-10 split, but that's not the way standards-based. Standards says you cannot assess on formative. That's practice, It leads up to summative, but you should be assessing on summative. And it shouldn't be like one and done type of thing. You should have multiple formatives before you get to the summative so you have an idea. It shouldn't be, oh my gosh, how did they get that? You should be able to predict what their summative grade will be. But next year, we are completely flipping everything. Got rid of numbers because we didn't want to use numbers because parents will then try to average numbers together because that's what they see. Even if we went to a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, numbers, they're just traditionally trained to average them together. We're not averaging, we're not giving an overall grade. We're done. We are reporting on 4 to 5 power standards for each discipline, separately on the report card. And they'll get an individual grade for each of those, and it's a word descriptor. Beginner, approaching, proficient, or mastery. They'll get that 4 or 5 times per discipline, whether it be math or science or whatever, and it is not averaged together.
Could you repeat that, please? Beginner what?
Beginner, approaching, proficient, and mastery. We stayed away from the advanced because advanced makes parents think that they like to use reading groups, like in elementary school, that they're in the 3rd grade class, but they're in the 4th grade reading group. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that they can do what they're able to do in more depth. They've mastered that. So we want to make sure that that was clear. And we have generic rubrics that describe what beginner, approaching, proficient, and mastery looks like. That covers all disciplines, so it's really generic. And then I'm now on the rubric writing committee for next year that we are writing specific ones for each discipline. So I'm on the one for foreign language, so we're writing the ones and it'll be applying for our both languages that we have. Yes?
What about those students that leave your district and go on to a school at a different district? Is there anyone in your district that kind of translates your words?
I can't tell you because we haven't done it yet. Next year is the first year. We've not gone to the words. Okay, you're welcome. So I don't know how that's going to work, but we've been training our kids. We started in the spring this year to let them know it was coming, our 6th and 7th graders. And then so that we sent home something the last day of school for parents. And we have a parent information night coming in the fall to talk about it. But one of the things we took ahead on was, they're like, well, how is this preparing them for high school who doesn't do it, and for college? Well, we went to Harvard, and we asked them. And they said, we don't care about GPA anyway, we want to know about knowledge. So we're like, if the Ivy League schools, who cares what anybody else in between says? If the Ivy League schools where, your kid may never get there, but every parent dreams, right? They don't care. They want the information. They said that's much more meaningful than a generic GPA because we don't know where that GPA number came from. So we kind of confronted that because that's what parents always say, how is this going to prepare them for the next level? Well, to be honest, nothing we do prepares them for the next level. They actually have to experience the next level, no matter what you try to do. I mean, as a high school teacher, I poo-pooed all the middle school teachers. I'm like, really? You did parties, conjugations, and food days in games. That's all you did, and they got credit for level 1? They couldn't hack in my level 2. I used to always poo-poo them. We don't do that at our school. We don't do any of that stuff, and our kids don't get credit for the middle school years. So the first year, in level 4, that's their first year towards college. So yeah, they don't get the credit because we're in 2 different districts. We don't have to talk to each other. They finally got it math. The math will do that. Now they have an 8th grade math, which is the freshman math, and just last year they did the credit, so they might find a way to give them the credit, but right now they don't get it. So the kids go, I've got to take 2 more years minimum. I'm like, yeah, you might as well keep going and go for the bilateral seal. You might as well keep going. So, yes?
When you get those new rubrics written, will you be sharing them offline possibly?
If I can legally, I will.
Okay.
I don't know because they're going to be written by, their districts. I don't know if it's going to be district kind of, confidential. I don't know. Usually our district doesn't work that way, so I don't suspect it'll be that way. But if I can, I will. So standards-based grading practices. So it's based off that. It's sound assessment design, and creating an accurate assessment is not as easy as it sounds. Okay? I'll I'll tell you, the College Board has not figured it out yet. The IB has not figured it out yet. The best one of them all is the New York Proficiency and Regents exams, but they still get something wrong too, they'll talk about. But they're the best ones. And Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, depth of knowledge, which is Common Core, doesn't work. I used to get this, superintendent comes in my Vegas because we were all depth of knowledge in Vegas, and they're like, second day, level 1. I don't see any depth of knowledge 3 and 4 questions going on. I'm like, and hell, you won't. They're kindergartners. I promise, if you could open their brain is doing depth of knowledge 3 and 4 gymnastics in their head, because I'm speaking to them in the foreign language, and they're having to interpret and respond to me. But you're not going to see any depth of knowledge 3 and 4 until we get into writing or speaking, which is not till 3 months in. Because they were born in Spanish yesterday. They don't have, yes, they have the cognitive ability in English, but I don't teach English. I teach Spanish. So you're not going to see that. So depth of knowledge doesn't really work for what we do. I love how, I almost called him Bill Crashen. Bill Van Patten, mixing the two up. Bill Van Patten says, we are like nothing else out there in the classroom. And when I started teaching and they lumped foreign language, world language, with performing arts in the graduation, I was like, no, not even close. But now that I've been doing it, I've been in the trench, I'm like, yeah, we're much more like a performing art or a sport than we are a math. You can't study a language. You can memorize vocabulary, but just because you know the vocabulary, you know the grammar words, rarely do they meet. You can regurgitate every grammar rule possible, but if you can't actually use it, there's no point. And it's no different than saying, okay, you're going to become a world-famous pianist. Here's the music notes. Here's how to play the piano. I'll see you on Friday for a performance. Which is what we do to kids in the textbook class. Here are the grammar rules. Here's the vocab list. Friday's the test. You actually have to get involved and actually do it. So we are like a performer. You cannot learn to dance or play a sport or play a musical instrument or sing from a book. You actually have to do it. And so Bloom's taxonomy speaks to us a little bit easier in that regard. Power grading has been developed and tested in my classroom over the past 17 years. I'm going to update that. We just finished another school year. 17 years. And brought to hundreds of world language classrooms around the world. I've been presenting since 2008. I presented in 38 of the states, and I presented in 2 foreign countries. I've done in Mexico and in France. So I've been spreading this around all over. Power grading does not, because this is one of the things that some other presenters like to always put in there, and I've never professed it to be, so I'm going to outward state so everybody knows, does not lead to language acquisition. That's not the point. Grades given in math don't lead to learning math. Grades in English don't lead to being able to read literature better. They're just supposed to report where a kid is in the progress of learning the discipline, and that's all it's meant to do. I just want it to be more accurately representative of what they're able to do. It just reports to what extent language has been acquired. As I said before, you cannot, people say, oh, I can't learn languages. And I say, I 100% agree with you. Not a single person on this planet has ever learned a language. None. But 99% of the population has acquired a language. And the only people who have not had either a traumatic brain injury or a severe brain defect. Because even kids with mental challenges learn language. Your Down syndrome kids, they learn language. They can learn a foreign language just as well as they can learn their first language. It's acquiring the language. It's not sitting and memorizing it like it's a text, like a math class or an English class or a science class. Problems with traditional grading. Tests, quizzes, projects, and homeworks do not give a clear picture. I cannot look at the grade book and see how to help my kids. Remember, I want to be that coach. I can't help them by looking at the grade book by itself. I can see, oh yeah, they got bad quiz grades. That doesn't help me. What specifically did they get wrong on that quiz? What was I measuring on that specific quiz? It might have been multiple things, and I need to actually go back to the quiz to see which questions they got wrong to be able to figure that out. That's way too much work post-fact. When you use tests, quizzes, projects, homework, and participation as gradebook indicators, you are unable to see students' strengths and weaknesses. I don't know where their strengths and their weaknesses are in regards to acquiring a language. Are they good at listening but not reading? Are they good at listening and reading but they can't produce, they can't write or speak? It tells me what I need to work on with them. Now, I don't believe in skill building. Oh, we need to practice vocabulary or do those kinds of things, but I know that in order for my kids to speak better, they need to understand language. Reading is not going to help them speak better. It's going to help them write better. So if I notice a weakness in speaking, I'm going to give them activities that more work on them listening to language and understanding that language. And if I notice the class is weak in writing, I'm going to give them more reading activities. These things I know. So it helps me figure out what kind of input do they need to be better speakers and writers. All these indicators do is to tell you which of these the student is better at. Tests, quizzes, projects, or homework. And most of the time, projects are where, if they're going to excel at anything, that's where they're going to put all their effort. They may not be good quiz or test takers. And homework is, if they're rule followers, they do it, and if they don't. And I honestly don't believe in giving homework. When I first started not getting homework, it was 2009. It was a request. We opened a brand new school, which doesn't happen very often in the Midwest, but in Vegas it happens like every month because we have some population growing. We opened this brand new school, and we taught on the blocks. We had 8 classes. In Vegas, Nevada works differently with districts. Districts are by county, not by city. So the entire southern cone of Nevada is one county. So I could have kids on the California-Nevada border, and I could have kids on the Arizona-Nevada border. Some of them were, commuting 3 or 4 hours on a school bus each way. And school started at 7 in the morning. So the parents were like, there's no way. They're getting 6, 7 classes of homework because Pete doesn't give homework. They're on the bus 3 hours each way. When do you want them to get this done? So we were brainstorming, and world language says, well, we don't need to give homework. We're not going to. And I checked this morning. I haven't seen it since, but the sky's still up there. Nothing happened. The ability didn't change up or down, but the grades went up because if you were grading at homework and the kids didn't do homework, their grades went up naturally because you weren't putting in the zeros. But that was because of necessity, but I actually believe in a philosophical that they need to be kids. They're only kids once. You can't, if we don't take a vacation one year as adults, we can take one the next year. They cannot retake their childhood. And some kids have, school, then they have all their homework, and they have other activities, and they don't have time to spend time with their family, gosh forbid, or hang out with their friends, or just be lazy and be a kid. So I don't want to take that time. We work on salary, and we work past our paid hours all the time. But normal adults don't do that, especially by hour check. If your boss said, I know you're going on vacation next week, but could you do this project and have it due when you come back? But often you hear teachers who give projects right before vacation.
Right.
Or, I know you're off at 5, but I need these things done. Could you do them before you come in tomorrow morning? Real life people don't do that kind of stuff. And so I don't think we should make that our kids. Our kids spend 6 or 7 hours in school. That's their job, and they need to have time away from their job. So I philosophically don't believe I'm a conehead that way. LP Cone, who believes that it's the second shift, and we shouldn't be doing that. And studies have shown it doesn't help or hurt them. It doesn't really, because we don't even know who does it. I had kids who were so creative. They did a homework pool, not a carpool, a homework pool. This kid would do it this week and everybody else copied. This kid would do it the next week and everybody else copied. They rotated the homework. I had to give them credit for being creative.
Yeah.
They didn't just do pairs. They had a pool going with 6 kids.
Wow.
And then they do homework once every 6 weeks.
Yeah, they divided. For school, they divided the 25 math things.
Yeah.
And you do number 1 to 5. You copy it the next day.
Yeah. So it doesn't help. This is not very helpful when guiding a student towards success. It's just not. Without going back and analyzing each assignment, because if I didn't label it right, I'd have to go back and see which questions they got wrong, there's no way to determine which skills have been mastered and which still need work. It's not based on standards. For decades, grades have been based on curves and norms. And I'm in Iowa, so this is going to be really funny. But in Nevada, up until I left there in 2012, we still use the Iowa-based skills test, right? It's the standard test. And no offense to you Iowans, but it's based on how smart or how dumb the population of Iowans they measured that year were. And on the West Coast, our lives are very different from the Midwest, versus the East Coast are very different from the Midwest and the West Coast. So basing the same amount of knowledge is not practical. And I did grow up in the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan. I just was smart because I don't like the cold, and I left when I was 20. I don't look like a polar bear, so I should not be in the polar vortex. So it's based on that. It's not even standards-based. It's still a norm-based on there. And depending on the population that they measured that year, the grades can be very different. And I mean, we used that in Michigan when I was a kid in the 80s, and I couldn't believe that Nevada was still using it in the 2000s. Students in classes with more high achievers tend to get lower grades. I always feel bad. You know, the smart kids, the kids on the advanced tracks, they all end up in one class usually because there's only one math class they can take and only one English class they can take, so they all get targeted. And then the one average kid gets caught in that class because that's where his schedule is. And I feel so sorry for that kid because they're the ones struggling, and if they're in one based on curves and norms, their grade's going to go down naturally because there is no curve. The top grade is 110%. And students in classes with less high achievers tend to get higher grades. So if they're in the average class and they're, below average class and they're an average kid, their grade's going to go and get inflated. This happened to me in, not me, but in my school. We had a physics teacher who was really, really hard. He graded a curve, and the high score was 57%, and that was the A. And you remember from college that physics is a prerequisite for a lot of high-end science courses, so when she had her A, the college thought that she had an A's worth of physics knowledge, and she was ready for these science classes. Well, she failed out of those science classes because she really didn't have an A's knowledge. And so the teacher was actually doing a disservice because it made the colleges, that's where that GPA is all bad business, that the colleges thought that she had more knowledge than she actually did. And she thought she had more knowledge than she actually did because she got an A in the class. Grades can vary greatly from one class to another, from one teacher to another, from one school to another, and from one state to another. There's just so many variants. All of us grade so differently that the same kid in each one of our classes is going to end up with a different grade. And one of the things we discussed in our grading committee was we didn't want to have percentages anymore because 0 to 100, there's 100 different variations there. And although two of us might be in the same range, we might all think they're in the 80% range, we're going to argue whether it's 84 or 86. But if there are less options, we're more in line as a group. Plus, you think, well, from 84 to 85 isn't a big difference, it's 1%. But a 79 to 80 is 1% too, but it's a big difference. A 69 to a 70, same 1%, big difference in there. So that's why one of the reasons why we wanted to limit to only 4 possible grades, so that we are more consistent, because the more options, the more divergent. Now, we were in the same ballpark, but the minutia wasn't there. We weren't consistently there. And these are moving targets. They don't know, am I in the smart class this year, or am I in the dumb class this year? It's a moving target. And moving targets are often missed. If you keep moving the target, they're not going to be able to hit it. The math doesn't add up. I told you I'm allergic to math. And this is from Rick Wormley. This was his presentation on standards-based assessment and grading in Farmington, New Mexico in 2014. He's got lots of books out there on standards-based grading. Just because it's mathematically easy to calculate doesn't mean it's pedagogically correct. And I'm so happy I didn't even have to ask our school district, came up with this on their own, so they, I didn't have to tell them I do this anyway. But back in the day when we had to add up the grades in the grade book, written wise, we didn't have computers to do it. You had to add up all the grades and then divide by how many to get the average. Let's be honest, how many of us did that for every single student there? We got 2. Okay, most of us eyeballed it. We only did the math on the ones that were close. If I saw a lot of A's in there, 9, that's what they were going to get. Because in high school, we didn't give a percentage anyways. We just gave the letter grade, not even pluses and minuses. They went off on the transcripts anyways. We just give a flat A. I could see there were a whole bunch of 90s in there. I'm not going to do the math. It's the same way here. The math belies the grade. And we've gotten permission from our district that if the math doesn't make sense, we can override the math. And we're going to see why they even thought about that. But it was like, you came across that on your own and didn't have to bring it up. Because I thought I was going to have to bring that up, that the math was really weird. Adults are rarely mean average. Now, mean, for those of you who don't know, is the mathematical term for averaging. And I say the mean, the averaging is mean to students. Adults are rarely mean average, and certainly it is irrelevant to an adult that they used to not know how to do something. Yet for a student, these 2 factors are dominant in their school experience. This comes from Tom Schimmer from Accurate Grading with Standards-Based Mindset on a webinar in 2013. If you don't know how to ski today, that makes no bearings on your life. If you decide to learn to ski tomorrow, that you didn't know how to ski today has no bearing on it. But kids, in September, if they didn't know how to do something, and the grade comes out at the end of October, that does have a bearing because their grade is lower than it would have been. And it's based on average. And we know one low grade plummets the average very quickly, and it takes forever to move it back up. I lived this. I had a 4.0 as a freshman in high school until I took algebra. Algebra 1, I got a C. And the only reason I got a C was because I was at lunch every single day in my Algebra 1 teacher's classroom, and he did not want me to come back. So he gave me the C. From my sophomore to my senior year, I got straight A's in everything. I had to take extra classes. I took independent studies, 4 of them in my senior year, to try to get my GPA up, and I graduated with a 3.89. Because that 1 C I had my freshman year, that screwed up the whole thing. I had to keep working and working and working and working to get that grade point average up, and I still couldn't get it as high as I wanted because of that 1 C. Depending on how you crunch the numbers, students can have very different grades. Let's take a look at this. This is like, if I were a 16-year-old girl and Justin Bieber was still popular, this would be my Justin Bieber. He friended me on Facebook out of random. I was like going crazy because this is my hero. This guy, 2002. Remember I told you when I started doing this, I had his book, How to Grade for Learning. The first edition it was either first or second edition I had. And that's a great book. It's written in big font, number 1. It doesn't have a lot of boring research in it. It just tells you the facts. And it has nothing to do with foreign language, but it's about grading in general, and I was like, every page. It was a page turner for me. So he was my first grading hero. Rick Wormley was the next one. But this comes from his book on the 2002 version. It's old, but I'm sure he's updated, but I don't have the updated version. And we're going to make some assumptions here. We're going to say these are all in chronological order, assessment 1 through 10, and they're all in the same standard. So we're going to make some assumptions. But we're going to do some math. So we're going to look at Karen. And I don't have a laser pointer, so I apologize. Karen. So Karen was slow to start. She got 0s in the first 3 assessments, but then got 90s all the way through. But if you add them up, you get 630. You divide by 10, she's got a 63%, a D- in most districts. Alex, the poor little boy, at least he's consistent, 63 all the way through. Add it up, 630 points, 63%. Jennifer. Now, she started off like Karen, but she got a little bit more knowledge here, but didn't catch up to Karen here. But here, she kicked Karen's butt. But you add it up, 630 points, 63%. And then Stephen, got to give him credit, kept on chugging along. He got 2 0s, then 2 62s, then 2 63s, and he finally got it. And he's got 2 90s and 2 100s. But you add it up, 63%. So by the way 99% of us all grade is based on averaging, they all would have a D minus. Forget the math. Look at the kids' grades. Would you agree that they all are D minus kids?
No, every of them know the concept.
Yeah. But if we only use the math, they're all getting the same grade. And the only one who truly deserves the grade is Alex. Another way to grade, which is what I told you, the median. The median is another mathematical term. And what it means is if you put, not chronological order, you put them in either lowest to highest or highest to lowest, doesn't matter. The middle grade is their grade. If there's an even set of numbers, you average the two in the middle to get the grade. So we have an even set, so they averaged 5 and 6. So we got 90, 63, 100, and 63. It's better, but I still don't agree with this here. I think he should get higher than that. Obviously not as high as these two, but he should be getting somewhat of a high. The point here is, however you calculate it, you're going to get a different answer. And should it be that variance? It should be, how well do they know and can they do the subject material? And that's not telling us. And any mathematician will tell you, a random set of numbers, averaging is not the correct statistic to find a trend. But that's what grades are. It's a random set of numbers between 0 and 100. Yet math teachers will put this down to the 2 decimal points. You know, but they know it's not really the correct statistic for it. So this is what our district discovered on their own and said, if the math doesn't make sense, you have the right to override it. You can't just do it out of the blue and say, oh, I'm going to give Alex an A. You have to back it up with evidence. You have to have the evidence in there, and as long as you do, no one's going to question you. Now, I've been doing this for years. I never lower the grade, but I'll up a grade based on evidence, and no one's ever questioned me. Because no parent, no kid's ever going to say, you gave me a higher grade than I deserve. So I never had a problem. But I've always believed in this. And the way our grading works now, it's on a floating mode. Mode is the third term in mathematical statistics. It's the most common grade that appears in a set of numbers. I actually advocated against the mode because I did the mode once, and this is what happened. I had this little cocky girl, one of 5 girls in my 18 years of teaching that I cannot stand. I only have 5 kids that I cannot stand. This is one of them. She knew how to play the game because I explained what the mode was and how we were going to grade. It's by the most grades that show up. Well, she already had plenty of A's, so she stopped doing any work in April. Didn't do the final. She just didn't do it. She just left it as a 0. So I lowered her grade. And her father made a big stink about the grade and how she lowered her. You didn't do the final. But she had the A's, and so the mode didn't work. The other reason was, so I had the cocky kids who knew how to play the game. They already figured they have enough of what grade they wanted, so they don't need to do anything more. The other one was the kid. It is so rare to have an Alex who's consistent. I would have kids with 5 A's, 5 B's, 5 C's, 5 D's, 5 F's, and the next grade that comes is going to determine their grade. That was too scary for me. So I didn't like the mode, but that's what they decided to do. They're doing the mode, but they're doing the most frequent 3 in each standard. So those early ones for Karen and Jennifer and Stephen won't even make a difference. They're only going to be looking at those. So every time we report grades, it's going to be on the last 3. We wanted to do it more than that, but the way the grading program works, they couldn't physically get it to do what they wanted to do. Do you have a question?
Well, I wanted to ask you, under your new system or what you've been trying in the last couple of years, I know that we've been kind of working on the standards-based grading a little bit, and this year, well, our first year was last year, so we had a 0, and we still have a 0 if the student provides inefficient evidence for doing something. But a 0 really means that the student has to do more because it can't have a 0 in the end. Is that kind of what you're doing with yours too now, where they can keep retaking the test after they've shown evidence of further study, so that if they, for instance, if they get a 3 and they're not happy with it, they can redo another version of the test to try to get a 4. Are you doing that, even that?
It's a loaded question. A couple things in there. We did not have a no-zero policy at our school. I had a zero policy in my classroom. We're going to talk about the zero in a couples coming up.
Okay.
So that's one. In coming up the next year, we now have a no-zero. You have to put no evidence as the grade. You have no evidence, which is truly what a 0 means. I have no evidence that you know the standard to any measurement. So that's not going to affect the grade. It's going to go in there. It'll say no evidence for that one. And then we also have ones not assessed. So if we don't assess the standard, it doesn't really happen in world language except in level 1. I don't assess in the first grading period, speaking and writing, but I assess it every other time. But in math, they might not get to integers, so that standard will have an NA not assessed yet, so parents know there's not a blank in there. So that's the first thing. Retakes. We are a retake district, but this is where I always say, do what you have to do to keep your job, but advocate for kids. So we did it, and we went to our administrator and said it doesn't work in foreign language because we're a skill-based. So just because you can't dribble a basketball today doesn't mean you can sleep on it tonight and come back tomorrow and be able to dribble a basketball. They need to have practice in between. Practice for us is input. That's what practice means for us. They can't just retake it because it's skill-based. It's not I can study for this and learn it for tomorrow. So with the exception of culture, which a lot of our culture is stuff you can study for, we don't have retakes. We just say we will just look at the trend as we go along, and we will focus on the later ones. So if they do better the next one based on the same measurement. Another listening assessment, you didn't do so well on the first one, but the next 2 you did well on, we're going to weight those ones more than the first one. That's how we've handled it in world language. The other classes are complaining because kids are using the retakes as an excuse not to study. I had a basketball game last night. I didn't have time to study for this test. I'll just take the F tomorrow, and I'll know I can retake it. And that was a problem because it's also tons more work because you can't give them the exact same test. You have to write a new one. And if they can retake it, and they technically can retake it unlimited times, you are writing unlimited numbers of tests. And so that can be a problem. So that's why it's kind of a mixed thing with that. Okay, so there's with the numbers. Here's our zeros we're talking about. Zeros destroy students' grades. You have no idea. In fact, I told this to a math teacher in a conference, and she didn't know how bad it worked. I'm like, you're a math teacher. 1 0 drops from 100% to 50%. So if you have 2 grades, one's a 0, one's 100, it goes down to 50%. Easy to figure that out. It takes 10 more 100% assignments, so now 11 assignments total, to cancel out 1 0 and bring the grade to a 90.9. But those 100% kids, they're not happy with a 90.9. This is where she freaked out. She did not know. She had to pull out her calculator to figure it out. It takes 1,000 more assignments. So now a total of 1,001 assignments in your grade book for 1 grading period. If you do that, you're crazy. More 100% assignments to cancel out 1 0 and bring the grade to a 99.9, which is as high as you can get it to go. Because you can't go back to a perfect if you lost 1. 1,000. Now think about how many zeros you've given kids, and that kid's going to give up. And what happens when kids give up? They cause what in your classroom? Problems. And sometimes it's not even your fault. They've gotten bad grades earlier because of those zeros in other classes, so now they're checked out and they don't care about school anymore. In Nevada, we had a problem because they can drop out at 16. And so I taught native speakers, and unfortunately that population education was not valued, especially in Las Vegas where you could be a parking attendant and make more than a teacher in a college education. They did it over the summer and they could make half my salary between tips and their hourly wages. So I couldn't use McDonald's won't hire you after 18 without a high school diploma. I couldn't use that hey, I've got a parking job that makes more money than you do. I don't need a college degree for that. So they would drop out and lose half of my native speaker classes once they turned 16. I started losing them. They all started dropping out. Lots because they've gotten the failures beforehand. And they're like, why bother? So the zeros really do more than just even lower their grade. You're really crushing a future with zeros. And really, how bad of an F do you need to give them? An F is an F. I don't know, do you give E's or F's here? F, okay. Well, we're on the dumb side of the United States. The East Coast does the alphabet properly, A, B, C, D, E. And as a kid, I remember E's were easy to change to B's on the bus on the way home. You get a dull enough pencil, you can do that. You can't change an F to an A or any other letter. It doesn't work so well. But it seems like on the west coast of Mississippi, we all do the F's. It doesn't follow the pattern. But the zeros really, really hurt kids' grades. For many, this is improbable. I mean, it's the math teachers too, and I'm not picking on the math teachers, but it's always them who goes, they've got 14% in my class, there's no way they can pass. Well, you just give them no reason to ever come to your class again. There's no hope. There's no way they're going to get that grade back up to a passing grade. And at the very least, it's a lot of work to recover. And most kids will give up and end up causing other problems because there's only two reasons why kids cause problems in your classroom. One, they're bored because you're not engaging them. And two, this. They've given up on school because they failed so many times already. Those are the only two. If you go back to every single problem that you've ever had in your class, those are the two reasons. They're either bored or they failed so many times they've just given up on school in general. Which then goes back to why they're bored. They're now bored because they're not doing the work because they don't care, and now they have nothing else to do, so they're going to entertain themselves. If this happens frequently throughout their school years, they are destined to drop out. Points. If you grade with points, all points are created equal. Points assigned to low-value assignments cancel out points assigned to high-value assignments. Homework. If you give, this is just an example, if you give 10 points homework, you think, oh, that's nothing, 10 points. And you give it 5 times a week. Over 10 weeks, it's 500 points. Then you weigh the final exam 500. You say, well, homework's only 10, so 505, that sounds perfect. But when you realize they're now equal. So a kid who got all the homework points but got none of the final exam points, they just cancel each other out, 100%. Because a point is equal. It doesn't matter if it's a positive point or a negative point, they're both equal, they cancel each other out. There's no way to isolate them. It's extremely difficult to plan ahead your entire year's worth of assignments to get the ratios right. You can do it, but you have to know every assignment and every point value that you're going to give for the entire year before the school starts, and you cannot deviate from that. You can't say, we had 3 snow days, I don't have time for this assessment, because that screws up your whole ratios. And then you're going to give kids heart attacks, because your final exam is going to be worth in the 100,000 points. Or your other ones are going to be in microscopic points. One way it's got to happen. And you're going to end up with thousands and thousands and thousands of points that you're calculating. So you're going to give kids heart attacks. You really are. Even if you could, because there is no barrier around your points, negative points will always cancel out positive ones. Grades have no meaning in a traditional grading system. Current grading systems have no meaning. They are a random number between 0 and 100. As we talked about, what's the difference between a 94 and a 97? Give me a word description of what the difference is between those. You can't do it. They are often a simple ratio of the number right over the number wrong. Math likes to do that way. 14 out of 20. Or a ratio of number of assignments turned in versus the number of assignments given. Their teachers like to punish kids and say, damn well, I gave that assignment, I better get it back. They don't care if they actually learned anything on the assignment. I gave it, I want it back, they're going to be grade there. Otherwise, 0. And sometimes grades are a ranking among fellow learners. Taught high school, the kids knew their ranking. They knew. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to be up to this ranking, and they worked. And I'm like, how does that help? Because that ranking only works in the school with the kids you have in there. And if a kid drops out or leaves that school and moves away, or a new kid comes in, your ranking just changed, and you did nothing, one way or the other, positive or negative. It has no bearing, so why we do that? There are some schools who finally gotten away from the valedictorian and salutatorian and all those, but the kids who still do that, I mean, they're fighting over those ranks. None of these systems of grading actually say anything about the learning. Which, isn't that what we're in the business for? Learning? Weights can dramatically distort grades. Weighting skills incorrectly can indicate false trends. We're going to talk about this a little bit coming up too. Or indicate ability when actually little exists. So if you don't know how to weight your stuff properly, then it's going to cause a problem. And when people come back and say, oh, this system didn't work at all for me, I'm like, what were your weights? And I find out, and I'm like, I know exactly why it didn't work for you. You didn't listen to me. Because if we teach with comprehensible input, they think because we spend more time doing input, that we should weight input heavier than output. But just because you can read and understand, and you can hear and understand, does not mean you can actually speak and write. And if you can speak and you can write, then you can obviously understand written and spoken language, because they're stepping stools. So my kids always get A's and B's on listening and reading assessments, because we do it so often it's really easy. Where their grade starts to differentiate is in their ability to speak and write. But it's communication. So you can't just listen. That's just the communication part. We need the co-part. So you need to be able to produce something for someone else to understand. So measuring the input, yes, we spend 99% of our time on input, and I only measure output this little time. But those are the true indicators of proficiency. Just because you can understand what you hear and what you read does not indicate your level of ability, how well you can speak and read. If I could only measure two things, those are the two that I would measure, because I get a pretty accurate grade from that. But I take all five, I do culture as well in there. But when they flip those percentages around, that's where the problems come in. And we'll talk about the percentages coming up. Grades don't give a clear direction of instruction. So grades are supposed to help me know what I need to teach tomorrow to my kids, and it's also supposed to let parents and kids know what their strengths and weaknesses are. But current grading systems don't do that. A parent doesn't know what a 96% versus an 84% looks like. They don't know what that means. They just know, based on, we train them like SEALs, that 96 is better than 86. The goal of assessments is not to give a grade, but to provide feedback. We've lost that. But that's the point of grades, to provide feedback. With grades, we document progress in students and our teaching. We produce feedback to students and their parents, and we make instructional decisions. That's Rick Wormley again. I don't know why his name came up. We can learn without grades, but we cannot learn without descriptive feedback. How many of you have taken those community classes like in art or dance or yoga? They have those that come out. You take them for like 6 weeks. You learn art or something just casually. They don't give you grades, but you learn. You learn because they give you feedback, what you need to work on, what you're doing well on, what you're not doing well on. So we don't need grades. But grades are meant to be a shorthand, because writing out a paragraph descriptor for every student for everything is very time consuming. Grades are communication. They are an accurate report of what happened. Again, that's Rick Wormley who said that. The principles of power grading. Relate all grades to identifiable learning goals. And I call them learning goals because I don't want to call them the standards, because the standards, as I told you, the ACTFL, they lump them together. So the more curriculum we combine into one grade, which is what the ACTFL standards do, the less valid the grade. Here's the way I explain this. You give a kid Play-Doh. They started out with like red and blue and green Play-Doh, or whatever the colors are they got. But give them 30 minutes and come back, it's a purple mass. You don't know what colors they started with or how much of each color contributed to that purple mass. You just got this purple brownish mass there. It's the same thing with grades. So if I put too many standards into one, I see they got a B, but what does that B mean? What parts of the standard did they get well and which they didn't? I can't tell because they lumped too many things together. I need to pull them apart. Learning goals must be aligned with Bloom's or another taxonomy. I told you I don't like depth of knowledge. I like Bloom's. Those that merely identify knowledge must be weighted low. I'm a kid of the 80s. That's all we were assessed on. They gave you the information, you were to regurgitate it back to the teacher. If you could do that, you got your A. And I learned it really well, got my A's. We thankfully moved beyond that now. They don't care in history so much about the names and the dates. They want to know, why did this happen and what was the outcome of that, which is much more important. Because I was never good at names and dates. I didn't know when the War of 1812 was. I got it wrong on every test. I had a student, she's still cracking me up. She said, we were talking about, we were reading a book, La Vida y Muerte en la Malva Salvatrucha, and we're talking about a civil war because that's where the game started. So I asked, trying to compare it with American cross-curricular teaching, how many civil wars have we had? She's like, 4. I'm like, 4? What are they? Wondering what she thought. She's like, there was the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Revolutionary War. And she was like, I'm like, we got one, right? We only had one. Yeah, I go, you might get a clue that World War I and World War II were not civil wars. So, measuring knowledge. That, for us, we use as culture. Because we weight it low, we assess it low because it doesn't indicate how well they can do the language. And in IB, there isn't even a culture standard because you're supposed to embed culture in everything that you do. Now, we know as teachers, culture is what keeps kids interested in the language, but let's be honest. You can learn a language without knowing culture. And usually what teachers focus on in culture anyways is the food and the holidays. But for me, what's more important culture-wise is so you don't look like a jerk going into their country. That, I explain to kids, like, they always make, I'm not trying to be racist, I'm not trying to stereotype, but I'm just telling what my kids say. But the Asians always cut line at Disneyland. They always cut in line. And I'm like, do you know why? They don't queue in Asia. It's not part of their culture. They don't understand. In fact, in Japan, there is a job that they're pushers, to push as many people on the elevator in the trains as possible because they have too many people and not enough space. So their job is to push you in. And they touch you and they push you in. And in America, we'd be horrified by that. Don't you touch me? But that's the Japanese culture. So instead of making a blanket comment, try to understand. I mean, I can always pick an American going into a foreign country because they're like at a restaurant, they don't even have a phrase book. They're like, do you have any? They're like pantomiming the words. I'm like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed to be an American. Even if I don't know the language, I have a phrase book. I am trying. I don't want to be that ignorant American going to another country. So when I focus on culture, I focus on those things. That things to make you look less than an idiot, and that's uncultured, that you don't understand how the real world works. Because the way we do it in America, most of the people don't. Like, no Spanish teacher told me in my 4 years of Spanish that the comma and the decimal point are reversed. I did not buy anything for the first 4 days in Spain because I thought, because back when I did, remember those little price tags? And they used to always fall off? Nowadays, kids, you don't see price tags, like, but they used to stick a little sticker on everything. I thought, they dropped a zero off, and I'm not paying $1,000 anything for anything. Pack of gum? No way. It wasn't until my 5th day that I realized that the comma and the decimal point was reversed. And everyone in the world does it that way except for America. So I make sure I explain that to kids so they don't look like an idiot like I did. Those kinds of things. Or that when you go to Colombia, they are not, they don't have a spasm when they're going, because they point with their lips. They don't understand because we know it's rude to point with your finger at people, but we can point at things, but they don't believe that. It's pointing with their lips. And the kids are like, what the hell are they doing? And like Thai kids, don't ever touch them on the head because they believe that's their connection to God. And when you touch a kid on the head, you're breaking their connection. Well, in America, what do we do with kids? Oh, such a cute little kid. That's so offensive. Or in the Middle East or Africa, using your left hand. I'm left-handed. I used to work for the airlines. When I went to school, I used to have to put it behind my back because they will not take anything from your left hand. It's considered the dirty hand. They won't do it. So I had to learn to take everything with the right hand. And the only way I could do it was to hold my left hand behind my back because my natural instinct is to give with my left hand. So you learn, these are the kind of cultural things that are really important to me, much more than they know about the Day of the Dead. We teach it, but you know, if they go to Mexico during the Day of the Dead, guess what? They'll learn better than I can ever teach them about it. But the other things they're not going to learn necessarily about. So that's what's important to me. But we assess it at a very low level, knowledge level. So I give that 10% in my class. So culture's worth 10% of my class. Next year won't be worth anything because we go to the IB standards and it's gone completely. Those that measure understanding must be given midway. Now, I have played with these numbers. Remember, I've been telling you I'm doing this for a long time. I have played with numbers. I've kept these numbers the same for the past 12 years because the numbers now work. I've done them all differently, and I finally found ones that work. Understanding. This is our comprehension level on Bloom's taxonomy. This is your listening and your reading. For me, each of those are worth 15%. So now we have 40% accounted for. 10, 15, 15. And those that indicate creativity, notice I skipped over application. I don't believe in application. ACTFL talks about application. They call it performance. Performance says you rehearse. I don't know about you. I've rehearsed. I've memorized those dialogues. I go to the country. They do not know their lines. So I am stuck. And I can't focus. So I don't want to measure that. I don't assess them on retelling a story in their own words and the target language. I don't assess them on those kinds of things. I want them to create something new with the language they have, whether it be spoken or written. So I measure creativity, which is the top of Bloom's. Because Bloom's was rewritten in the 2000s. And they switched evaluation and creativity synthesis because corporations said, Americans think really well inside the box, but they can't think outside the box, and we need people who think outside the box to be able to progress. So they swapped them around. So creativity, that's where I'm assessing writing and speaking at. That's 30% each. That's 60% of their grade. Those numbers are magic. If you play with those numbers, you're going to get different results. Those ratios, those percentages work really well to give you a grade that is really indicative of what a student can do in the language. It really is. Only include grades that demonstrate language acquisition. You can put whatever you want in the grade book, and I use my grade book as a tracker, but I'll put it in a category that is worth 0, so it doesn't add or subtract anything from the grade. So parents can see it, kids can see it, I can see it. I don't want to keep a separate spreadsheet for tracking. I can just do it in a grade book, but I just put it as category 0. That's where we put all our formative assessments. They go into category 0. I don't ever think you should ever do this, but I know teachers who do. Oh, their notebook is well neat put together. They put a grade in that. Okay, put it into category 0 if you want to track that. I would not waste my time. I've got better things to assess. So we had a teacher who always, I would love to do paper Mexican flowers in my class. Awesome. We don't have the time for that. We have an enrichment period. Put that in there. Because how does this indicate how well they can do language? So we got in the habit during our PLCs, everything we did. Let's say, how does it measure how well they can do language? And if it doesn't show us that, then we don't put it in the grade book. We don't spend class time on it. I want to do painted skulls for Days of the Dead. That's awesome. Do it during the enrichment period that we have, because you're not taking class time away from that, because you're taking away from language acquisition. Before entering any assignment in the grade book, ask yourself, does this assignment measure the student's language ability? If it doesn't, you're welcome to track it, but don't have it count towards the grade.
How did you get around the cultural shift of what you just said?
I guess I didn't have a cultural shift of it, because when I read the book back in 2002, How to Grade for Learning, it made sense to me, and I said, ding, ding, ding.
And I agree with what I mean is, like, for some of my parents or some of my students, the mentality, the cultural mindset is, well, if this doesn't count, I don't need to do it.
Oh, this is what you do. You tell your parent, did you clean your bathroom this week? How many points and how much money did you get for that?
Yeah.
There are things, I also have this quote in my room, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. That's also by Albert Einstein. Everything has value. Because if I put it in the book, it has value. And I tell kids, the sports parents too, practice doesn't count. It doesn't go in your win-loss ratio. But if your kid doesn't show up to practice, you're going to have more losses than wins. It's the same kind of thing. We do things as adults in the real world that we don't get points for. We don't get money for. We don't get, appreciation for. But we still have to do them. And they may lead to appreciation or money or value somewhere else down the line. Because, if you don't clean your bathroom every week, you're going to live in a pigsty. But eventually it's going to take a hit on the value of your home if you're not taking care of it. So there's logical consequences to things. But the problem with kids nowadays is they're in the everybody gets a trophy situation. And we have found that has caused a huge problem in our discipline. And California just passed a dang law that we cannot suspend kids for overt defiance, rudeness. There's a couple other things that we repeated. I mean, you wouldn't do it the first time, but if they're completely being defiant and disrespectful overtly in class over and over and over again, they would get a day suspension. We can't do it by law anymore. We can only suspend for physical things now. And so you're condoning more behavior, and we're finding we're having more and more of these kinds of kids in class who go out and say things, but they didn't do anything. Like I had a kid who was literally sexually harassing me, telling me, "Oh, Prof, you're so good looking. Oh, all the sexual." I'm like, all we got was he couldn't come to me and I couldn't go to him. That was it. That was his only punishment. I'm like, really? In the real world, he'd get fired and I could sue him. And if it were reversed, if I was sexually harassing a student, I'd be out the door during the investigation.
Tell me again the reasoning of how this got changed?
It was a law. It's a law that just got passed in California.
But what's the reasoning?
I couldn't tell you what the reasoning is. They are not educators who passed the law.
Of what?
Okay? I mean, how many people in the Board of Education, whether in the district or state level, are actual educators or have been educators? Very few.
Well, that's our job, we get them on the school board.
Yeah. So I lost where I was trying to say.
I was talking about the cultural shift.
Oh yeah, the cultural. So that all the trophy thing,
Yeah.
and that's what's causing the problem. Everybody, I did something. I deserve something for it.
Yeah.
And so
Always
we're trying
a transaction.
we're always trying to change that. And so I just use metaphors to try to explain that. You just don't get much kickback.
And I do that too, but it's one of those things where if a parent doesn't come to back to school, doesn't come to conferences, and doesn't read the syllabus, and doesn't dig into the online grade-book and look at the breakout, they just see the percent and say, oh, my kid's a C student. Well, but your kid isn't doing any speaking assignments. They come to class and they sit there like a sponge, and
I send an email telling them that. Because I don't have kids, people who come to parent nights or all the things that we have, but still I just send them, usually about halfway through, I look at all my kids who got C's or lower and I send out an email to each of those parents about why their kids got that grade.
assuming they have emails available.
We also have something called, our email system isn't really email anymore, it goes to the grade book, and it goes through the phone system. So they choose how they want to be contacted by the school, whether it be by phone or by text or email, and it sends it out whichever way they're supposed to. So it goes to our system that way. So however they get communicated that way, it's the same way they get communicated if there's a shooter on school. So they usually put the right information down for that stuff. God forbid that ever happens. If not, do not include it in the academic grade. Grades must have meaning. I go to what, 355?
Can we have a phone group?
You can. Go ahead and have 10 breaks.
We can do this one.
Yeah, go ahead. Take a 5 minute. 5 minute.
Thank you.
Because we still got a lot of stuff.